You know, that banana sitting on your kitchen counter right now has survived a, frankly, ridiculous amount of chaos to get there.
Mm.
I mean, it's navigated more geopolitical warfare, more complex shipping reroutes, and, like, more high-tech chemical engineering than almost any other item in your house.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we just look at it as a piece of fruit.
Right. You probably paid, what, like 50 cents for it? You just tossed it in your grocery cart without a second thought?
Yeah.
But right now, in 2026, getting that simple, everyday piece of fruit from the tropics to your local store is literally at the dead center of a massive, highly volatile global crisis.
Yeah, it really is a physical manifestation of this staggering amount of hidden global friction right now. Like the supply chains we've all relied on for decades are just fundamentally buckling.
Which is exactly what we are unpacking today. We've pulled together this really fascinating stack of market forecasts, trade analyses, and agricultural economic reports. And our mission for this deep dive is to essentially cut through the noise. We want to figure out the hidden global chaos that is actively reshaping our fruit bowls.
Because it's affecting everything,
Totally. We're looking at geopolitical conflicts, massive supply chain breakdowns, and this quiet tech race happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
We want to figure out what the future of our food supply actually looks like for you, the consumer. Because the global fresh fruit trade is entering a phase that is intensely volatile, but also, like, surprisingly rich with totally new opportunities.
Well, what's fascinating here is the immediate physical roadblock driving all this volatility. I mean, if you look at the trade data over the last year, the biggest immediate disruptor is the conflict in the Red Sea and West Asia regions.
Right.
And looking purely at the logistics and the economic impacts here, setting aside the politics entirely, this situation has just completely scrambled the vital shipping routes, the ones that connect Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. It is fundamentally a massive problem of geography and compounding risk.
And it's an absolute nightmare for the people whose entire business is built on moving highly perishable food across the planet. I mean, looking at the reports, the exporters in places like India, South Africa, Egypt, Turkey, Europe, they are getting hit from every single angle.
Yeah, it's a massive cascade of logistical failures. It's never just one thing going wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Transit times are stretching out to levels we literally haven't seen in decades. Marine insurance is skyrocketing, and you have these shipping companies slapping on these massive war risk surcharges.
Plus, you've got a severe global misallocation of reefer containers.
Yeah.
The refrigerated one.
Right. And because ocean freight is so chaotic, the cost to just bypass the ocean entirely and throw the fruit on an airplane has just spiked into the stratosphere.
Yeah, to put some concrete numbers to that chaos, we can look at one of the most critical arteries for global trade. So
Yeah.
historically, if you were shipping a container of fresh produce from India to Europe, that transit time was a really predictable 20 to 25 days. The entire supply chain was calibrated to that specific time frame. But because commercial vessels are now having to divert all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, so the southern tip of Africa just to avoid the Red Sea, that exact same journey is taking 40 to 45 days.
Wow.
Yeah, the industry essentially had transit times doubled overnight.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because, wait, shipping fresh fruit is basically like flipping an hourglass, right? But instead of sand, it's a ticking time bomb of rotting produce.
That's a very accurate way to look at it, yeah.
So if the trip around Africa takes 45 days and, like, a banana goes brown on my counter in 3 days, the map just doesn't add up.
Oh.
We're talking about something that is actively decaying the second it is cut from the tree.
It's constantly breaking down, yeah.
But before we even get into the biology of how anything actually survives that trip, this brings up a massive contradiction in the economic data that I really need you to explain.
Okay, what is it?
Well, if shipping is so expensive and delayed, right, and it's so hard to get fruit to market, why am I, the consumer, paying way more at the grocery store, while at the exact same time I'm hearing that the farmers growing the fruit are going broke?
I know, it seems like a paradox, doesn't it? But it's actually the classic economic symptom of a broken bottleneck.
Yep.
It's a dual-edged sword, basically caused by physical geography.
Okay.
So on one end of the chain, you have the retail consumer. Retail prices are rising globally because the supermarkets have to absorb the massive inflation in logistics costs.
Ah, so they're passing the buck.
Exactly. The war risk surcharges, the millions of gallons of extra fuel for the Cape of Good Hope detour, the sheer cost of keeping a shipping container refrigerated for an extra 20 days, all of that gets passed down to you, the consumer, so you pay more.
But the farmer isn't seeing a dime of that extra money.
Oh, not only are they not seeing it, they are actively losing value. Because the export routes are choked, the fruit can't physically leave the country of origin, and that creates a massive localized glut.
So there's just too much fruit sitting around.
Exactly. The reports highlight India as a prime example of this right now. There are literally hundreds of containers of bananas just stranded at Indian ports due to these shipment disruptions and vessel shortages.
Right.
And because the exporters can't get them out onto the ocean, the export prices have collapsed. All those millions of bananas are suddenly dumped back into the local domestic market.
Which completely saturates the demand.
Precisely. So the farmers end up getting absolutely pennies for a crop that the global market is actually desperate for, simply because the physical bridge between the farm and the foreign supermarket is broken.
That makes total sense. I mean, it's brutal, but it makes sense. The value isn't in the fruit itself anymore. The value is entirely in the ability to move it.
Yes, logistics is everything right now.
Which brings us back to the biological reality I mentioned a second ago. How is anything surviving this? Because obviously, an apple doesn't age the same way a strawberry does. Shipping delicate fruit on a slow boat feels like, I don't know, trying to keep an ice cube frozen in a warm room by just blowing on it.
That's a great image.
You're literally fighting the basic laws of thermodynamics.
You are fighting thermodynamics and you're fighting cellular breakdown. And that brings us to a really harsh biological divide right now. The transit crisis is forcing this brutal separation between resilient crops and fragile ones.
Okay, so who are the losers here?
The highly exposed fruits, the ones taking the biggest hit in this 45-day transit shock, are things like table grapes, bananas, and soft berries.
Right, they just turn to mush.
Exactly. They simply do not have the biological stamina to survive a detour around Africa without massive degradation in quality. But on the other hand, the commodities capturing market share right now are the harder, thicker-skinned fruits. Citrus is the major standout here.
Okay, so citrus. Like your oranges, your lemons, grapefruits from places like South Africa, Egypt, Turkey, Morocco, Spain. Citrus is basically the rugged backpacker of the fruit world.
The rugged backpacker, I like that.
Yeah. It can handle a 40-day detour, get knocked around in a container ship, and still show up on a supermarket shelf looking pristine. Whereas like your premium mangoes and delicate table grapes are high-maintenance VIPs.
They really are.
They demand expensive first-class air travel, or they just flat-out refuse to make the trip.
Well, the backpacker analogy works well for the biological rind, but there's a vital economic reality to citrus, too. I mean, a grapefruit or a lemon is incredibly dense and heavy, meaning the freight cost per unit of profit is wildly different than a carton of delicate grapes.
Because grapes need all that special packaging.
Right. Grapes require a lot of protective empty space in their boxes. Citrus just gives you a high volume, low spoilage, and really steady global demand for vitamin C.
Right.
But let's look at your VIP, the mango.
Oh, I love a good mango.
Right. Well, the sources show that the mango trade is fracturing entirely based on this transit math. It's becoming highly regionalized.
How so?
Well, if you're a medium quality mango exporter and you are suddenly forced to use air freight because the ocean routes are just too slow for your fruit to survive, those air freight costs will completely destroy your margins.
Oh, because it's so expensive to fly them.
Exactly. Consumers might pay a premium for fruit, but no one is going to pay $50 for an average everyday mango.
Right. The air freight cost completely eclipses the actual value of the commodity.
It does. However, the true premium varieties like the Alfonso, the Kizar, the Tainam Dak Mai, the Pakistani Sindri, those command such a high retail price that they can actually still absorb the cost of that first-class air travel.
Ah, so people are still buying the really fancy ones.
Especially in Gulf markets with strong diaspora populations who specifically seek out those exact flavor profiles. So the ultra-premium survives, but the middle collapses.
Man, that is wild.
And for bananas, we're seeing a massive geographic pivot. Importers in the Gulf are looking at those stranded Indian shipments we talked about earlier and saying, look, we can't risk this unreliability.
They just can't count on them showing up.
Right. So they're actively shifting their sourcing away from those long-haul disrupted routes, and they're turning instead to Ecuador, the Philippines, and various African origins to secure their supply.
So the entire map of global trade is literally being redrawn in real time. Like importers aren't just taking this lying down.
Not at all.
In fact, looking at the sources, they point out that these rolling shocks are rewriting the fundamental rules of how grocery stores buy food. We're looking at a complete paradigm shift projected for the period between 2026 and 2030.
We really are. I mean, for decades, the entire model of global retail was based on finding the absolute cheapest supplier.
Right, just get it as cheap as possible.
You scoured the globe for the lowest cost per kilo, and you just assumed the logistics would miraculously work themselves out because shipping was reliable and cheap. But that era is effectively over. Buyers are completely abandoning the cheapest supplier model. Today, they are desperate for the most reliable supplier.
Because, I mean, buying the cheapest fruit on Earth doesn't matter if it arrives as a puddle of rotting mush at the port.
Precisely. Importers and supermarkets are now prioritizing logistics reliability above almost everything else.
What does that look like in practice?
When they look at a supplier now, they're analyzing their ability to maintain shelf life. They want absolute control over the cold chain, meaning keeping the fruit at the exact right temperature without a single fluctuation from the moment it's picked until it hits the shelf.
And what about the paperwork? I read something about that.
Yes, flawless documentation is critical now. In a disrupted supply chain, a single missing customs document or a delayed letter of credit can mean a container sits at a port for 3 extra days.
And 3 days in the sun ruins a whole shipment of grapes.
Exactly. It's game over for that shipment.
Which makes me wonder about the broader implications for the consumer. Like, does this mean the end of the hyper-globalized supermarket?
It's definitely shifting that way.
You know, the whole idea that I can get a Peruvian blueberry in the dead of winter in New York, are countries just going to start buying exclusively from their immediate neighbors to avoid all this shipping drama?
The sources strongly suggest that is exactly what's happening. There is a massive structural shift toward regional sourcing, purely as a risk mitigation strategy.
Give me an example.
Take the Gulf region again. They are a massive importer of fresh fruit because of their climate. So to bypass the long-haul risks, they're actively trying to source much more volume from nearby partners.
Like it.
They're looking at Egypt, Turkey, Iran, East Africa, and potentially India, and they're stepping away from their historical reliance on distant Latin American suppliers for certain vulnerable categories.
Because shorter distances just mean less transit time.
Which means less risk of spoilage and disruption, yes.
Okay, so shortening the physical map is one solution. You just buy it closer to home. But what about the fruit itself? Are there ways to artificially alter that biological reality we talked about?
Oh, excellent.
Because the reports outline a massive boom happening in agricultural technology right now that sounds straight up out of a science fiction novel. How are technology and chemical engineering stepping in to fix this?
Well, the agritech boom is really the industry's attempt to engineer its way out of the geopolitical crisis. Because if you can't make the ship move faster through a war zone, you have to make the fruit age slower.
That is wild.
The demand for advanced post-harvest technology is just skyrocketing right now. We're talking about the mass deployment of controlled atmosphere or CA containers.
Yeah, I saw those in the reports. But how do they actually work? Are they just like super-powered refrigerators?
No, they are much more advanced than simple refrigeration. To understand how they work, you have to remember that fruit is basically still breathing, even after it's picked.
Like it's still alive.
Right. It undergoes cellular respiration, it takes in oxygen and releases carbon dioxide and this naturally occurring hormone called ethylene.
And ethylene is bad.
Ethylene is the chemical trigger that tells the fruit to ripen and eventually rot. So these controlled atmosphere containers actively monitor and adjust the internal environment. They scrub the ethylene out of the air, and they drop the oxygen levels down to near zero.
Wow, so they're stopping it from breathing.
They're essentially halting cellular respiration. You're basically pausing the biological clock of the fruit while it crosses the ocean.
That is incredible. You're literally suffocating the ripening process until it hits the destination port.
That's the exact mechanism. And, you know, it doesn't start with containers. The sources highlight massive growth in specialized ethylene management packets that get placed inside individual consumer boxes.
Oh, so even in the box I buy.
Yeah. We're also seeing the rollout of proprietary shelf life coatings.
Wait, what are those?
These are invisible, edible, plant-based barriers that are applied directly to the skin of the fruit to trap moisture inside and keep oxygen out.
Like a little force field.
Kind of, yeah. You also have smart packaging that actively responds to temperature fluctuations. This entire sector of post-harvest preservation isn't just a niche science anymore. It's turning into one of the most critical, fastest-growing opportunities in the global agricultural economy.
But here's where the deep dive gets really intense for me. Because it's not just agri-tech companies and supermarkets getting involved here. It's actual sovereign governments.
Yes. This is a huge shift.
The sources introduced this concept called food security nationalism. And it's no longer just a grocery store trying to secure a year-round supply of apples. It's entire nations viewing fresh produce as a critical strategic asset, almost like oil or microchips.
The mindset has definitively shifted from commercial trade to national security, and Middle Eastern nations in particular are really leading this trend because they are so heavily reliant on food imports.
Right. They can't grow a lot of it themselves.
Exactly. So they aren't just putting in seasonal purchase orders for fruit anymore. They are taking direct action to own the means of production.
What does that look like?
Well, they're actively investing billions in massive domestic hydroponic facilities to grow produce right there in the desert.
Wow.
And even more significantly, their sovereign wealth funds are purchasing vast tracts of agricultural farmland in Africa. And they're locking down these aggressive, multi-decade sourcing contracts to guarantee their strategic reserves.
So they're just buying up the farms in other countries.
Yes. They are ensuring that no matter what geopolitical event closes the Red Sea or what climate disaster hits a growing region, their populations will have guaranteed access to food.
Which brings us back to India, because the sources really zero in on India's unique position in this new era of food security nationalism. Geographically speaking, India has a massive natural advantage for servicing these wealthy, food-insecure Gulf markets.
Right, because they're neighbors.
Exactly, it's right next door. The reports highlight this golden opportunity for India to absolutely dominate in categories like pomegranates, mangoes, bananas, and dragon fruit.
They do have the geography, yes. But geography is only potential. The execution is what actually matters.
There's a catch.
There is. And the sources are very clear that India faces severe internal roadblocks. They have chronic systemic issues with port congestion, which, as we discussed, causes immediate delays.
And delays mean rotting fruit.
Right. They're battling severe freight inflation and bureaucratic documentation delays. And historically, because of past quality control issues, there is this lingering hesitation from Gulf buyers.
So they have to prove themselves.
Exactly. To capitalize on this geographic advantage and really tap into that food security nationalism, Indian exporters have to radically modernize their cold chain infrastructure.
They need better fridges.
And they also need to vastly improve their traceability. Gulf buyers today need to know exactly which specific farm a pomegranate came from, what chemicals were used, and the exact temperature it was kept at every single hour of its journey.
It's just a really high-stakes game of modernization. Which makes me want to look into the forecast for a second, because referencing the medium and long-term projections from these reports, who actually wins in this new landscape? When we look out toward 2030, who comes out on top?
So looking at the medium term, like the next 1 to 5 years, the data points to a very specific geographic belt of winners. We're looking at a list that includes Egypt, South Africa, India, Morocco, Turkey, Vietnam, and Thailand.
Okay, wait, I'm noticing a distinct pattern there.
Yeah.
If you look at Egypt, Morocco, and Turkey, those are all countries perfectly positioned right on the immediate edge of Europe and the Middle East. They are bridging the gap.
Exactly. Proximity is the new currency. Sourcing from Morocco to feed Europe or Turkey to feed the Gulf dramatically reduces ocean transit exposure.
Because you don't have to go around Africa.
Right, and you see the exact same pattern in Asia. Thailand and Vietnam are making the winners list because they offer that same geographic proximity and risk mitigation for massive Asian import markets like China and Japan.
Okay, so that's the who regarding geography. But what about the how? Like, how does the actual business structure of moving this fruit change over the next few years?
Well, if we connect all these disruptions to the bigger picture, the ultimate mega trend defining the period from 2026 to 2030 is the absolute death of the pure trading company.
The era of the middleman is over.
Completely over. Historically, a pure trader was an entity that just bought a container of fruit from a cooperative of farmers, sold it to a supermarket in Europe, and took a margin.
So they didn't actually make anything.
Right. They didn't own the farm. They didn't own the packing house. They didn't own the trucks. They just moved paper and negotiated prices. But in a world of extreme logistical volatility, supermarkets cannot rely on a middleman who doesn't actually control the physical product.
That makes sense.
Large retail chains are now demanding exporters who control the entire vertically integrated supply chain.
So they want to deal with one single corporate entity that owns the dirt the tree grows in, the packing house where the fruit is washed, the proprietary coatings applied to the skin, the refrigerated trucks moving it to the port, the compliance documentation, AD, the final consumer branding.
Everything under one roof. Yes.
Wow.
That is the future. Contract farming and direct retail linkage are becoming the industry standard. The supermarkets want a direct line to the soil
Because they need that control.
because that is the only way to guarantee the reliability, the traceability, and the unbroken cold chain integrity they need to survive these geopolitical shocks.
And if you're just a trader,
If you are just a trader trying to buy spot freight on a disrupted ocean route without any control over the actual farming practices or the post-harvest tech, you are going to be squeezed out of the market entirely. The risk is simply too high for the buyer.
man, it's an intense, sweeping transformation of an industry most people literally never think about. But I do want to make sure we highlight a very optimistic detail buried in all these complex forecasts.
Oh, yes, it's not all doom and gloom.
Right. Despite all these geopolitical disruptions, despite the port congestion, the war risk surcharges, and this massive shift in how the business is run, the global fruit cultivation market, meaning the actual total volume of fruit the world is growing and consuming, is projected to keep growing strongly all the way through 2030.
Yeah, people still want their fresh fruit.
Exactly, and the industry is finding incredibly resilient, inventive ways to get it to them.
The underlying consumer demand remains completely unshakable. The only thing changing is the highly sophisticated, incredibly complex machinery required to fulfill that demand in a fractured world.
So let's pull all these threads together. We started out looking at commercial vessels taking a massive 45-day detour around the Cape of Good Hope
Yeah.
just to avoid conflict in the Red Sea.
Right.
And by following the impact of that one logistical shock, we uncovered a total bottom-up transformation of global agriculture. We are seeing a boom in sci-fi agritech, like controlled atmosphere containers scrubbing ethylene to put fruit to sleep.
Which is still mind-blowing.
Totally. We're seeing a massive structural shift toward regional sourcing, where proximity is valued over pure cost. We're watching the rise of food security nationalism as countries buy up foreign farmland. And we're witnessing the rise of the fully integrated supply chain, where the middleman is dead and the supermarket demands a direct line to the farm.
It is nothing short of a complete structural overhaul of how the modern world feeds itself.
It really is. So the next time you're standing in that produce aisle and you reach out and pick up a simple, unbruised piece of exotic fruit, maybe a mango or a bunch of bananas, remember what you were actually holding. You were holding a marvel of geopolitical maneuvering, smart packaging, thermodynamics, and high-stakes crisis management.
And that reality leaves us with a really critical question to consider as we look toward the 2030s.
Oh, what's that?
Well, as nations increasingly hoard farmland abroad, and as they lock down these proprietary high-tech shelf-life technologies in the name of national food security, will a diverse array of fresh, exotic fruit eventually stop being a standard global commodity?
Could it become exclusive?
Exactly. Could that simple mango eventually become a luxury item, exclusively available only to the citizens of the countries with the most aggressive agricultural treaties?
Man, it makes you look at the produce aisle completely differently. The fruit bowl isn't just a healthy snack anymore. It's becoming a map of who has the power to feed themselves when the global supply chains break. Well, a huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the stories behind your everyday life, and we'll catch you on the next one.